Hi, Trolls. Welcome to the Meta 101 podcast. And for the audience out there, I guess they'll be wondering what you do, how we know each other, and everything. But just to quickly give you an introduction, um, the best way I can think about it is to say that, Trolls, you are now a co founder of a startup company, which is sort of working to make it easier for children to sort of communicate the amount of pain they feel. And this company is based in Norway at the moment, in terms of, and there's about four of you guys in this new startup. So, yeah, I mean, is there anything else, Charles, you'd want to say besides studying engineering with me in Nottingham before you went to do your master's in engineering again in Norway, and then now you're at sort of like is it the Norwegian School of Technology, but just the sort of like the business part of it right now. What are you doing?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So first of all, thanks for having me on the podcast. I'm super excited to be here. Yeah. So I mean, everything you said there was correct. I'm currently going. It's called I guess in English, it's the Norwegian University of Science and Technology, and it's up in Trondheim. And I think it's kind of like at least one of the biggest universities in Norway, and it's definitely like the biggest kind of technical university in Norway.
Nice.
So the university has a lot of focus. There's a lot of engineering degrees and technical degrees, and obviously very like heavy science based university.
No, that's good. And from what I gather from what you're saying, you guys have started this startup. Are you backed by the university, or is it something you're doing entirely on your own?
Yeah. So that's a good question. I think it's a little bit difficult to put it in sort of one category. So basically, what it is, I'm doing a 2 year master's program now, where they take in students from like all sorts of different disciplines. And so I think they try to kind of take in sort of one third engineers, one third sort of more business and finance background, and then one third kind of science related background. So and that's obviously that's quite broad. So that could be if you've just studied like biology, or for example in our class we have two nurses who I'm currently in a startup with,
Nice.
and so I think they've kind of fall into that category, right?
True.
And then what they do is they take in so like a third from each, and then it's a 2 year program, and it's like a master's in entrepreneurship, with that, and then with a special focus on your kind of background, right? So mine is obviously within then biomedical engineering, like we studied in England, and then what you do is parallel and sort of integrated into this program is all of the students either have to join or create a startup, either with people from the class, or some people work with external co-founders, so to say, or maybe they
Nice.
join an early stage startup, and then
So,
yeah.
sorry to cut you. I just want you. So, when you say that you guys work with external guys, does it mean they also then sort of like help you venture out of this, or how? Or what role is that external support playing in terms of what you guys are working on and starting, and the university and everything? So, how does that all come together?
Yeah. So basically, when I say external, I
Yeah,
mean it could, for example, be. I guess I can't really go into like way too much detail
of
about
course.
other people's startups, obviously, but it
Yes.
could, for example, be that like for our startup, if we need like if we realize that, oh man, we could really use a really good programmer, then we get like an external programmer to come and join us, right?
Nice.
Or another example is obviously there's potentially like a researcher who has discovered something, patented something, come up with a really good idea, but isn't very good, or isn't very knowledgeable within commercialization or business, or finance. And then you can maybe so but then what you could do is your role would be commercializing their technology. um, So that's what I mean. Like you could like, so I know some people have taken external ideas, so it's not their own
Yes.
idea,
Yeah.
and then they try to commercialize that.
Makes sense because
Mm.
sometimes they say there's no need to reinvent the wheel. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
and
Yeah.
I think that's a miscommon conception, or it's a misconception that happens a lot. That's quite common, that people think that for you to start a company, you need to go out there and you have to start something that's brand new. You don't have to always do that. You can pick up an existing idea and then sort of polish it up, change a few things, maybe sort of like tailor it to the market you're targeting, and then yeah, and then you can make a successful business from that. But I'm really happy to hear that, and I guess this is quite different from engineering school. Would you say the support you're getting, yeah, and how is it changing your perspective from like the default engineering point of view to now thinking more commercially and being
Mm.
business savvy, as people like to call it?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, that's a that's a great topic and a great discussion that we could have within that. And yeah, no, it's definitely quite different. And you can see that not only within engineering, but I guess within like medical sciences and like heavy research in general. And I guess that's one of the biggest things is a lot of research that's done by very very capable and intelligent professors never gets out into the world because they don't know how to commercialize it. You know what I mean?
Makes
And
sense.
so it just kind of ends up in some paper somewhere, and they publish it somewhere, and then they move on to the next project, so to say. And so I think there's huge, huge, huge potential
Nice.
within the commercialization of like publicly funded research. And I know
True.
that's something that people do, or like that's something that is available or possible, at least, is you
Yeah.
like, let's say in Norway, at least the university owns the rights to the patent if like a researcher patents something.
Yeah.
But then what you can do is you can obviously you can get a license for that patent, and you have
Makes
to come
sense.
to some sort of agreement with the university, and then you can try to commercialize it.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
And you can license it out to the companies and you get
Hmm.
sort of like royalties for every amount they sell and everything like that.
Yeah, yeah,
No,
exactly. Yeah.
that's the same here as well. And I think that's why some people tend to avoid the really good universities. Especially from a research point of view, if you're very entrepreneurial as a lecturer or as a professor. Because I was having a conversation with one of the professors in the university, and you're saying that the higher the university, the more they take in terms of the stake, or in terms of the
Hmm.
ownership of whatever you create. So it's something people tend to want to juggle, and that's why some brilliant people might feel comfortable either leaving the university entirely or taking a safer route of working sort of like in a medium range university. So therefore, you still have a huge chunk of your own IP to own. So no, that's good. And just quickly, just rewinding back for the audience out there. Um, just to discuss as to how we met. Obviously, I think I've known you for about almost 6 years now, so it's quite
Yeah.
a long time, and
Hmm.
time has flown by. I we finished university together, but also whilst we're in university, we stayed together with flatmates in second year, which was quite
Hmm.
nice. And first year, yeah, we're friends. We used to just take the bus back. And I think I have to say it out there for everyone, just to let them know as well that I appreciate how much you helped me during the coup that happened in Zimbabwe, and all my money was
Yeah.
frozen overnight.
Mm.
So it was a rough I'll say 6 to 8 weeks when I didn't have access to any of my money because overnight all the banks just closed. You know,
Mm.
they were closed all international transactions because they were worried that everyone was just going to pull the money out of the country. So, and I remember I had to borrow some money from you for a little bit to pay for some food. So I really appreciate that, and it's good to see you now working on this startup in medtech. And I know it's a field that's not field with many people. Many people don't really think of it because I think it's quite an emerging field. It's not as established as other types of tech. suppose it's before it used to be a blend of many things and stuff like that. So yeah, but it's nice to see, you starting working in this startup to help children map their pain and everything, which is quite a crucial thing because pain is a very complicated thing even for adults.
Mm.
So yeah, then this just basically the history of how we've met and how we know each other. But now going into, I guess, the meat of this podcast is the company you guys are starting, VennDi. So is it a Norwegian name or is it an English name? What exactly? How did you guys come up with the name VennDi?
So our team consists of 4 people currently, 2 of which
Yes.
have a background within nursing. So like a bachelor's of nursing, and they've worked as nurses for a bit.
Yeah.
One of whom has and then the third person has a background within informatics and specifically like UX design or UI design, and sort of
Nice.
a little bit more like design thinking and human interaction and things like that. And then there's myself, with a background within biomedical engineering and molecular medicine. And then all 4 of us now are taking this same master's degree within entrepreneurship and sort of business and business and innovation. And so really the idea came about from these 2 nurses who have obviously worked a little bit as nurses, or they have like what do you want to call it, like practical work, you know what I mean, like an
Yeah.
internship or yeah, as nurses, or placements, I guess you could call it.
Yeah.
And then they were also taking a course, like sort of an entrepreneurial course, where you kind of a little bit like how we had Grand Challenge, right? So where you
Yes.
you kind of that you have to come up with an idea or some sort of or a challenge or a problem within some sort of industry, and
Yeah.
then kind of come up. And then I think within this course they had to come up with a business plan, they had to come up with a solution, and then they had to like pitch this, right?
Yeah.
And so that's kind of where they came up with this problem of mapping pain, because they had obviously worked as nurses and realized that it's pretty difficult to map pain even in adults. You know what I mean? So like
Yeah.
today in Norway, and I think all over the world, really, you get like a scale, that the nurses will hold up in front of you. Uh,
Yes.
or whoever's mapping the pain, and it's from like a 0 to 10 scale, and they kind of ask you like, yeah, how much pain are you in right now?
Yeah.
And pain is obviously a very subjective thing, right? It's based on
Of course.
experiences. So somebody who has maybe been through a lot of pain, they might say 3 to something pretty serious, or it could be serious. Whereas somebody who's
Exactly.
never experienced pain, maybe this is the most painful thing they've ever endured, so they'd say a 10. um and
So
obviously
this
it
one of the
gets,
things you
yeah.
sorry, is because it's just an interesting point you mentioned there. So,
Mm,
and I don't want to cut you, but because I don't want to block your flow of thought, but it's just exciting what you said right there. Working with this information that's sort of subjective, and you guys are create working on this algorithm to try to make it more standardized amongst children. So that's interesting. And yeah, okay,
mm.
I'll let you continue. Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah, yeah, I don't know. And so they that's where they came up with kind of this idea, this problem, and then they worked on it a little bit. um and they went and visited like one of the bigger hospitals here in Norway, and they spoke to children and worked with some children, and then they went on to this master's program. And that's kind of where obviously we met each other. And yeah, so that's like where we met each other. And then obviously, or not obviously, but in the first semester, so the first half year of this master's program, uh, we have this subject where basically you do 6 kind of feasibility studies
Nice.
in randomized groups. Um, and so you get to work with a lot of different people, and the idea here is that you create like a big pool. So I think maybe there's like 7 groups and 6 studies, so 42. So there's like a pool of like 42 ideas is what
Wow.
is the idea, right?
Yeah.
And then ideally, I suppose, if you've done a good job, the your startup is kind of supposed to be able to pull some ideas from there. And then you go on and you become a startup. You find who you want to work with, and take an idea from there. Obviously, it doesn't have to be an idea from there, but that's why we do that in the subject. um and so obviously, yeah, so this is where I met them, on that program. and where we met our fourth member. And we obviously all have we all have a really keen interest within medtech and within medicine and health and helping people. And so that's kind of where we forged like a friendship, and decided that we wanted to enter some sort of a venture together.
Nice.
And 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 then yeah, and so that's kind of where like the whole idea came from, was from their practical experiences, and then now we've all gone together. And so long story short, into where the name comes from, that's something that they had, that's something that they actually had before I joined the team, so to
Well,
say, or before I joined the venture, or the project.
nice.
And but what it means is, so VennDi, so in Norwegian, Venn
Yes.
means friend, and then di, like di, is kind of like digital, right? So the whole
Nice.
idea here is that it's a digital friend for the children to help
Nice.
them express their pain.
No, I'm really happy to hear that. And since you've said this, Rose, it makes me think of how you guys are going to be sort of cooperating different skill sets there on this team. And
Hmm.
do you want to talk about more of as to what your role is on this team and the process of finding in people's roles? Because I think there's many people out there listening to this and they'll be thinking, okay, I also want to start a startup. I've got a bunch of friends, but then how do you go about choosing the roles? How do you pick on each other's strengths? Like, how do you find that and say, okay, this guy will be better as CEO, this guy will be better handling the finances? How, do you want to give us a quick secret on how you ended up with your role? Because I'm sure I haven't seen a book out there written on this, so it's one of those things you don't learn at school.
Mm. Yeah, so I mean, I'm not gonna sit here and pretend that I'm an expert. I'm sure people will disagree with what I'm about to say, or people have different opinions.
Yes,
But at least in my opinion, because I think what a lot of people will do is, they'll sit down together and maybe they'll be like, oh, okay, but you studied programming, so you should be the CTO, or you should be the technical person. You
yes,
studied business, so you should be the CEO, or you studied economics, so you should be the CFO, right? But I don't necessarily think that that's the right way to approach this whole thing.
yes,
In my opinion, at least, what you should do is you should sit down and you should list out your interests, and list out all of the different tasks that the company or the startup or whatever needs done. So, list out every single different task: social media, does it building a website, building a product, the different steps within building a product, meeting potential customers,
yes.
finding capital, writing applications to different pitching competitions, all of these different things. And then, I mean, to be honest, in the very beginning, if you're like a very early stage startup, I'm not sure it's really necessary to put labels on it. Like, like there is just kind of, you could just split it up into the different areas of responsibility. You know what I mean? But above all, I think the most important thing is to find your roles based on what motivates you the most,
Nice.
right? So even if you have a background within programming,
Yeah.
that doesn't necessarily mean that you want to be the one sitting there and writing code the entire day. You know what I
Makes
mean?
sense.
Like,
Yeah, yeah,
maybe you want to be out there with the customer and working with the customer actively, and maybe more kind of like working, yeah, like in user testing and things like that.
true.
And then I think for the longevity of a project, I think it's much more likely and much more useful to have
Yeah,
that person than working
makes
directly
sense.
where they want to. And
All
so
right,
that's kind of the approach that we took.
nice. So it's
So
more
we sat
natural.
down.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So we sat down. So we sat down. Everybody listed what it is they're interested in. We listed all of the areas that need addressing, and then we kind of delegated from there. You know what I mean? And we had a very open discussion. It wasn't, and nobody was like, I want this role, I want that role. We weren't so focused on like labels.
Yeah,
But I guess what it came down to was, so we're four people, and
yeah,
so we're developing this like digital solution, now to map pain in children.
yeah.
And so the roles that we came to were kind of like I think it's a little bit silly to sit here when you're four people and talk about C level roles, kind of, but just for the sake of simplicity, I guess. So we came to kind of like a CEO,
Nice.
to have like a CPO, so like in charge of the product and kind
True.
of, I guess, like the tech a little bit as well,
Yeah.
and then as like a CMO, so like looking at the market, looking at the customer and user testing and things like that,
Nice.
and then like a CCO, so like the commercialization, so kind of like the branding of the brand, our branding, so like our website, our social media,
Yeah.
working with looking at like investors and trends in the market and things like that.
True. And
Mm.
it's interesting you say that because I was actually surprised when I was doing research for this podcast and looking at the information that you guys have been presenting in terms of talking about the business opportunity that comes from this platform or app or digital asset or product or platform, depending on how you want to talk about it, that you guys are building. And you said about 20% of children in school are experiencing some sort of like chronic pain. So that's obviously a huge population out there. And specifically, you guys have been um, targeting, or sort of like your market is children between the ages of 5 and 13. So I guess taking this approach where everyone is just doing hands-on and you're just working together to get the job done essentially, without taking much roles,
Hmm.
and the different experiences you have, you with more of like of a engineering background and maybe the things you're comfortable with, and the nurses as well with the experience that they have, because as much as we would want that, the also that experience also gives you a better understanding of exactly what problem you're working to solve. um would you be able to just be able to describe what the app looks like? I mean, is it available now online? Do you guys have a like a sort of like a prototype? Where you guys in how far are you guys at the minute?
Yeah. So we don't have anything available right now,
Okay.
like publicly.
Yes.
What we are doing is we're currently working on our prototype, or like our MVP, uh, and we're working with that towards like a goal of we're of beginning a pilot project at one
Nice.
of the bigger or biggest hospitals in Norway. Where we're studying, and we're hoping to have all of that in place for September. So like early September is
Wow.
when we want to begin user testing at the hospital. Um, so obviously we have a pretty hectic time ahead of us now to
Yeah.
create this prototype.
True.
But I in terms of what this app or what our solution is going to do specifically, um, is so basically, and it's like you said, we're not reinventing the wheel or anything here, right?
Yeah.
So what we're doing is we're kind of trying to digitalize the solutions that are out there, right? The solutions that they use today are very analog, like a
Yeah.
scale 0 to 10. Some have like face indications, where you can see it looks, the face looks sad and then less sad and happy, and yeah.
So
And
it's
so what we're
visual.
trying to do is, yeah,
Mm.
and so what we're trying to do is create like a visual, as stepwise app, kind of, so where children can go in,
Yes.
they can create like a personalized avatar, right? Like you can do in lots of different games, kind of like you can do on like Snapchat with like the uh, emoji on Snapchat, or like, yeah, the avatar on Snapchat. So children can create their own one that they feel sort of like, hopefully they'll feel like a connection to. You know what I mean? They'll feel like
Nice.
they an ownership over that, and then put that avatar through different scenarios and different steps where they can then localize their pain. They can identify the intensity of their pain, so how much pain they are in, and that'll obviously, we have, so there, in terms of this user testing, we're going to be testing a few different solutions, right? Because we don't know yet what the best way to do that is, and then also what type of pain it is. So
Nice.
if it's a burning sensation,
Station.
if
Yeah.
it's a prickling sensation, if it's like a stabbing, if it's a, yeah, if it's yeah, so the different types of pain. And then also we want to include different mental factors, right? Because a lot
Nice.
of children, when you're in pain and you're or maybe for the first time, or at least you're inexperienced with regards to pain, a lot of children feel very scared, they'll feel anxious,
Yeah.
they feel unsure, they don't know what's happening, there's a lot of fear.
I mean, even the discomfort is quite a lot. I was trying to think
Hmm.
of my time as well, my memories as a kid when I was just in pain. Sometimes you just in bed all day, and it's even worse when you can't articulate the pain because you're still young. You've not had a lot
Mm,
of experience, sort of like life experience to compare the pain to. Because right now as an adult, you can just say it feels like a light headache because we've had headaches, for the last 20 years or
mhm.
something like that. But as a kid, you're still discovering the world essentially. So, and I like the approach that you guys are doing of using avatars, because eventually that's the world we're going into now with, virtual reality, and the generation coming up right now, they'll be more comfortable with avatars, being able to link to the internet, because that's where the technology is going right now. All right, so we're living in a world where you can sort of start to personalize your life with the existing technology. So I don't know if that's Web 3.0 or Web 4.0. I'm not sure anymore, but it's according to
Mm.
that, and that's what exactly this product will do. And for the avatars, just a quick question for the avatars. Um, are you guys planning to make them as realistic as possible? Will this information be also shared with like parents, doctors, in terms of how are you guys gonna navigate that sort of challenge with, the from a technical point of view? What challenges are you planning to overcome?
Uh, yeah. So yeah. No, I mean, in terms of like the realism of the avatars, that's why we've chosen like a specific age segment, right? Like 5 to
Nice.
13, and
Yeah.
even within that, there's a lot of different maturity levels, right? So a 13-year-old is much more mature than a 5-year-old, and even
Yes.
two different 13-year-olds can be there can be a huge difference in their maturity level as well.
Yeah.
Um, and so obviously, that's one of the things that we also have to that we have to work out a little bit is the art style.
Yes.
What resonates most with children. We might have to have several art styles. You know what I mean?
Nice.
Um, and then in terms of like the regulatory and sort of in terms of in terms of who gets this access to this information,
Yes.
to begin with, at least during the pilot project, it'll be the
Yeah.
doctors and the nurses, right, who can look at this information, and then
Makes
the
sense.
idea is that they can use this. They can use this to help with hopefully with diagnosis, right, like or help to understand the child's pain more,
Nice.
and they can also use it potentially for like long-term tracking, right, to like help adjust treatments, like obviously it's very difficult even for myself, for adults, and even more so than children, is
Yeah.
after maybe you've been to the hospital, and then you're supposed to kind of journal your pain for 2 weeks or whatever, and then you go home, you come back after 2 weeks, and the doctor's like, yeah, so how's it been? I
Yeah.
mean, it's very hard to say what I was feeling 10 days ago on on a Sunday or whatever, like yeah. So
Exactly.
being able to
And
use this to track long-term pain as well.
nice, nice. And that's
Mm,
that's true what you say, because usually what people do as adults is you tend to measure your pain with how mobile you are. So if you had a pain on your knee, for instance, and you couldn't really walk and you were limping everywhere, you tend to just say, okay, the pain is gone because now you're no longer limping. Because, isn't it, pain is also quite linked to that sort of like evolutionary biology, where it's a mechanism for the body to protect itself. So
mm,
you have this pain around a certain area that's been harmed, or that's had a bit of like a traumatic impact there or whatever, so that you don't have to move it so much, so that the body can sort of focus on repairing that part. And I think then that's how at least how I measure pain. And I think that's how most people measure pain, but for kids it's a lot harder. So, and I was looking at the interface on the presentation that you have and stuff. I don't know if I'm okay to share that with the audience, the few screenshots that I have from the presentation, or is it still something in development at the minute?
well, I mean, so yeah, everything we have is still in development, and
Yeah,
I think what you have right now is very basic and very conceptual.
yeah,
So that's obviously not really at all what the finalized product is going to look like. That's just kind of
nice.
something that was
Yeah,
created
definitely.
quickly to help
Yeah, I'll
to help
definitely add
to
it
help
because it
to help
it adds.
adults visualize themselves.
Yeah, nice, because that I'll add.
Yeah.
Even though you say it's basic, I'm even excited to see what the final product will look like. Because when I looked
Mm,
at this, I was like, this is quite sort of like descriptive in a way that how you try to compare the pain, using different visuals and stuff like that. It's like a bit of a human factors work there, how to link certain things. So I'll definitely add a few screenshots of that. But I do apologize that the screenshots are in Norwegian, unfortunately. But it's okay. People get the point. You just have to focus on the interface more than the language is written, because that can always be translated. So thanks. And
Mm,
just moving on to the next thing, which was the money part. And usually I don't talk about money on this podcast for the simple
mhm.
reason that I'm not an accountant, I'm not a finance guy. I'm more technical than anything, so I feel more comfortable talking about the technology. But you guys said you're going to be saving quite a lot of money for the hospitals. And going back to the presentation and the stats that you guys did from your market research, you said you'd be saving roughly 68 million Norwegian kroner. So how what okay, to put it more on an international scale in US dollars, how much is that money annually?
Yeah, so I mean, right
Yeah.
right now the Norwegian kroner is at a record low, I suppose. But
Yes.
so I think it's if we divide it roughly by 10, 12. So I mean, yeah. So if it's like, let's say 60 million kroners, that's around, let's say around $5 million, something
Dollars.
like that.
And that's in
Yeah,
Norway
so
alone,
yeah.
or
Hmm.
from your calculations?
Yeah,
And then
that's
when
yeah. So that's Norway alone. Yeah.
nice, nice. And obviously there's the
and,
potential
and
to scale up. Yeah.
Yeah, and obviously, what we've done there is, I mean, this isn't entirely accurate, because it's
Yes.
very difficult to measure these sorts of things. But what we've chosen to do is we've taken kind of an approximation, right? And so
Hmm.
what we've done then is we've looked at, with the time that, once we uh, finalize our app, make it as efficient as possible, as seamless as possible, the amount
Yes.
of time that the healthcare system can save in terms of physically going and mapping children's pain,
True.
uh, amounts to that amount of money in wages, right? So
Well,
that's the amount of money that they would save by not having to physically map children's pain, and therefore opens up time for them to do other tasks, more, maybe not more important tasks. Obviously, this is extremely important to do, but it opens up their time to focus on other tasks, while the children then can map their own pain through our solution.
makes sense. And you said
Mm,
the solution here that you create as well saves the about 50 minutes. It takes 15 minutes per day in total for a nurse to map pain in children. It's quite a lot. It's quite a lot of time when you think that the average shift is probably eight to, well, so I know some nurses work 12 hours shifts, but if we just take the normal standard shift of 8 hours, that's a huge
mm,
percent of time saved, which can be used elsewhere. So that's a problem that's definitely there, because you're just making people access the same result of getting their pain
mm.
mapped, but a lot faster. So how do you guys how did you guys also come up with that calculation? Did you do some surveys? Just for guys out there wanting to start a company and they want to know how to gather this data, because this valuable data, how did you guys go about getting it?
Yeah, so I must admit, like, those particular numbers aren't super accurate
Right.
anymore, so to
All
say.
right.
But basically, what we've done, or what we've read, and obviously two of the members on our team are nurses themselves, right? So they have experience with
Nice.
this,
Yeah.
and so I think you're supposed to map pain
True.
around 5 times per day, right? So that's not
Okay.
necessarily per nurse, but that's
Makes sense.
that's through 24 hours, right?
Well,
So obviously that's probably
different
multiple
shifts.
nurses.
Makes sense.
Yeah, different shifts, right? So
Yeah.
those 5 times that you're supposed to map pain are spread out across different nurses and different
Well,
shifts. Um,
so it adds up.
and then yeah, but so then what we've heard, obviously,
Yeah.
from some, and so basically what we do is we go and we talk to a lot of nurses. We go to the hospital, we sit down, we talk to a lot of nurses, we talk to some doctors. We That's where we get our information from, and our, like, kind of some of our market validation. And then we sat down and we spoke to them, and how much time do you spend mapping pain? How difficult is it to map pain? And obviously the answers vary a lot, like they do anywhere.
Nice.
And obviously, some children are very talkative and experienced with pain, so they can
Yeah.
answer quickly. Some children, it can be very difficult. Some children maybe don't speak, maybe they're nervous, they don't want to talk to strangers necessarily, and so there it can take a little bit more time. But yeah, no. So 10 minutes is probably unrealistic. It
Yeah.
takes less than that. Um, but yeah, no. I mean, it definitely, definitely with like an app like ours where you can kind of automate the entire process.
True.
You're definitely talking about saving time here, because the idea here is that the nurses or healthcare personnel or whoever will be able to just kind of hand an iPad
Yeah.
to a child, uh, and it'll be so intuitive, and you'll have like an on-screen guide and everything that walks you through every step,
Yes.
that the child, maybe along with a parent or whoever's there with them, can just do it all on their own, right?
Nice.
And you would, hopefully, the end goal here is obviously to eliminate the need for a healthcare a healthcare personnel to have to physically map the pain at all.
Pain. Makes
And
sense. And
so they
that's
just,
that's
by the
really
time they go into the yeah, so by the
so
time they go into the patient room, then you have all the data you need, basically.
makes sense. And yeah, I was gonna say that's really good because a lot of time is spent in sort of like triage as well. I don't know what the healthcare system is like in Norway, but I know here in the UK, people sort of have to wait several hours before they see a doctor once they get to A&E, because the nurses have to sort of like triage the injury. Is it a broken bone?
Mm,
Is it just a fever? How much pain
mhm,
you're in? All those things affected into that. So I guess when you are able to do this digitally or using technology, we can then refine that process a little bit. It may not overhaul the whole process, but it'll make it a little bit better than its current state. So that's really good. And yeah. Okay, so yeah, we're back for the second part of this podcast episode with Trolls. Trolls was the co-founder of VennDi, digital pain making. Also, pen. Sorry, my tongue got twisted there. Which is a digital pain mapping app
yep.
for children
Mhm.
between the ages of 5 and 13. So it's quite interesting, Trolls, what you guys are working on there. And as we were discussing earlier, I just wanted to touch on, like the two different types of pain, like in general. As I said, the point of this podcast is not to go into great, detail of length of like big words. I try to avoid big words as much as possible in this podcast, and hence I even called it 101. There's no way you're gonna say
Mhm.
anything called 101 and it's gonna be use big words there. So
No, yeah.
taking the same approach, there's pain is broken down into two types of pain, right? We have the fast pain and we have the slow pain. The fast pain being the pain you feel when you're stung by a bee, or when you burn yourself, or when you're like freezing when you touch ice. And the slow pain is the pain that's more chronic, like the pain that you feel over a long amount of time. And the reason why they call them fast and slow is because the fast pain is pain you feel a lot quickly, and I think the nerve cells are a lot faster in terms of getting that message to the brain, because essentially pain what pain is the feeling we get in the brain, right? And we won't touch the four types of receptors that make people feel pain. But looking at your guys app, the nice thing about it is that the app will be on the phone and you always take the phone home, right? So you keep your phone with you. So it means that it's something then that can also cater for this both types of pain. But what have you guys taken in terms of what approach in terms of how long you keep the data? Because I know you mentioned that you plan to keep the data for long term for doctors to see. So when someone comes back later, they can try to measure accurately if they've actually improved. So what difficulties or have you faced trying to build something like that? or what solutions have you guys taken to differentiate between these two types of pain in your algorithm?
Yeah. So that's a very interesting question, and my brain, immediately kind of branches out into a ton of different areas here. But yeah, so yeah, definitely. Like I agree. Two kind of main types of pain, I suppose. I think yeah, we kind of talk about it as acute and chronic pain. And so, like you said, acute pain is obviously when you cut yourself, or there's something that happens very quickly, something acute. You hit yourself, you fall. And then chronic pain is something that's much long lasting, for several weeks, months, years, potentially your entire lifetime, right? Like autoimmune diseases and things like that, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of chronic pain doesn't always have a clear treatment plan. Maybe there isn't always a clear cure. And so um, I think our app definitely has potential within both areas, but they are quite different, right? And so I think, and obviously within acute pain, it also depends. Like if a child comes into an A&E, uh, or like an ER, right, an emergency
Yeah.
room, and they have a visibly broken arm. I don't think they need an iPad in front of them or a phone in front of them, and pressing and drawing where their pain is and what type of pain it is, right? Because it's so obvious what it is that's wrong.
Yes.
Where it becomes useful is when there's maybe pain that's not visible, right? So it's internal of some sort. Uh, or maybe there is a visible sore somewhere, but maybe they have pain elsewhere in their body. Identifying that and what type of pain that is, and where that originates from. And then obviously within chronic pain, I think uh, there's a lot of use cases here too, right? And this
Yeah.
is especially where it becomes particularly useful to map the long term.
Yes.
So, for example, a child with, let's say cancer, for example,
Yeah.
right? There can be tremendous amounts of pain from the treatments and from the disease itself, right?
Yeah.
So then being able to kind of track the pain and where in the body this pain is and what this pain feels like, what type of pain it is,
True.
like the sensations involved, can be really useful then to adjust the treatments, right?
Makes
To
sense.
stronger medication, or if the pain weakens, or if the pain lessens, they can slowly level off some of the medication,
Education. Makes
because
sense.
obviously you don't want to over medicate somebody either.
Of course.
Um, and but in general, one of the bigger problems is that children get under medicated, right? They don't get
Makes
enough
sense.
medication because hospitals, because doctors and nurses are so scared of over medicating them,
Yeah.
that they under medicate them. And what can happen then is they can develop, like, long lasting, like kind of like
True.
psychological scars.
Makes
Like they
sense.
can develop a really bad relationship with pain,
True. And
like an unhealthy relationship with pain. And so
makes
that's
sense.
obviously something that we want to avoid.
Nice. And it's interesting you say that, Trolls, because earlier today I was listening to a podcast about pain as I was preparing for this for our own podcast. I was like, okay, let me listen
Hmm.
to another podcast about pain. And the doctor there, I've got his surname or his name, but I know he's a South African doctor, but he's been all over the world. He worked in London. Now is and when he had this podcast, I think he was now based in Boston. And one of the things he mentioned was that when there was some studies that were conducted, and they saw that kids that had, like hernia, which is a condition some kids are born with, when they were treated, kids that experienced a lot of pain when they were younger, the way they perceive pain when they're older was a lot different from kids who perhaps didn't experience the same thing. So I totally understand that. So therefore, we need to then sort of like make sure that the kids aren't experiencing pain that can be avoided, and so that's a good thing that you mentioned. And the second point you mentioned was with the medication points as well. And the thing with medication, mostly most of these sort of like localized
Anesthetics, yeah.
anesthetics. I
Hmm.
was I was gonna say anesthesia, but it's not anesthesia. Anesthesia is someone's name. Anesthetics. Most of those localized anesthetics, what they do is they they act on sodium channels, you know, like how in the body, like more. But the problem with these painkillers, they don't just only target that one nerve cell where the pain is. They're sort of like blanket. They're like a blanket
Mm,
bomb, right? They just go
mhm.
everywhere in the body. And the issue with also over medicating this is that, you know, it starts to affect things like even the heart cycle as well, because that's also muscles. Muscles work on sodium. So it's, you know, it becomes quite tricky. So therefore, I can understand why people are worried about it, and at the same time, you don't want to overdo it, because not only that, you also then start dealing with. Once you overdo it, the body sort of adapts to that level, and when you try to wind off the drugs, and they end up having some sort of like withdrawal symptoms, and you know, relapsing back, and ends up creating this huge sort of like opioid abuse, which we see right now. And I think it costs the government a lot of money as well. So this technology of helping to map that pain is going to go a long way. Um, but besides this, in terms of like mapping pain and the difficulties that have come with that, for children, um, are you guys planning to take a different approach, or what approach are you taking for children that you wouldn't do in adults? If I may ask, just out of curiosity.
Yeah, well, so I think obviously the first thing is, going back to this kind of like subjective experience, right? So it's
Yes,
it's creating a visual aids that the children can associate with.
nice.
You know what I mean? So if we think of it in its simplest form, if we like, let's take emojis for example, right?
Yeah,
Everybody knows emojis,
yeah,
uh, and so like obviously, let's say you feel some sort of burning sensation on your arm, right?
yeah,
Then obviously the emoji would be the fire. You know what I mean? That would be a super simple way to express that type of pain. If it's some sort of freezing pain, it's like the little snow crystal. If it's
true.
let's say it's like something like a stabbing pain,
Yeah,
it could be a knife. If it's a pounding, it could be a hammer. You know what I
yeah,
mean? So
yeah.
using these things that
Simplifying it.
children, yeah, exactly, where children kind of understand it.
Yeah,
They can understand, like, if they see a fire, they understand that's hot. It burns.
yes.
Using these sort of like associative things, that can help them visualize the pain and understand it, or at least associate with the pain.
This might even be
So
good
that's
for kids who can't talk, because other kids have
hmm
delayed speech, or they can't put their
hmm
speech together yet, and but they
yeah,
can see. So yeah. Continue. I'm just
yeah, it's
getting
that, yeah.
ideas. The ideas are
Yeah,
just
yeah,
flowing
yeah,
through my head,
absolutely.
and yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah, yeah, yeah. So yeah, children with like limited vocabulary or
yeah,
limited speech functions,
yeah.
absolutely applicable to them as well. And then also, what we're going to try to do is, I think it's well established and well documented, well researched, that children can express themselves better through a third party.
Nice.
So what I mean by that is, for example, I guess the most obvious example is a child who's seeing a therapist, right?
Yes,
It's easier maybe to explain a traumatic experience using a teddy bear, right?
makes
And
sense.
explain and point to the teddy bear what happened, and things like that. And that's what we're trying to do here as well. We're
Well,
trying to create sort of this third, so like a
party.
third person, a third party,
Yeah,
where they can retell the story of what happened to them or what they're feeling through this digital
yeah,
avatar,
makes
which
sense.
they hopefully associate with, right? Because they've
Well,
created it themselves.
yeah, and it's interesting because the avatar can be anything based on what you're saying. They can be
Hmm.
their favorite teddy bear at home. It can be themselves. It can be a character they love, and then they can. And by doing that, they already have some sort of trust in that avatar,
Hmm.
because if they identify somehow with it, and it's quite smart to do that. I never really understood, child psychology. Obviously, I didn't study psychology, but I can see the sense right there. I can see the value it's creating for them. Um, but do you think that as much as you're creating this for kids to be able to relate to that, and to build that, does then does that then change sort of like the classification of this product? Because I know, like in medical devices, the next hurdle is going to be the regulatory affairs. Is it something you guys have started to think about that? and what sort of things are you doing right now in your design to mitigate some challenges, because I know, like, one of the things that we some people do is that they when they're designing something, because they don't want to enter like a class 3 medical device, because the higher
Hmm.
you go, the more the work you have to do. We try to keep the devices in its right category without adding anything that might be detrimental. So is there like a because let's say if a kid made a mistake on the app, and is there another sort of like a second gate to make sure that the key doesn't get a higher dosage after they've made that mistake on the app? Is this something you're thinking of, or in terms of risk management and stuff?
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, absolutely, and obviously that is one of like the big hurdles is the regulatory affairs and
Yeah,
getting approval and everything,
yeah,
and so we're very aware, and we act very deliberately when it comes to how we're designing this app. So we are very purposefully avoiding any sort of diagnostic assistance. You know what I mean? Like the
yes.
app is not, at least in its early form, right? It's not going to suggest anything. It's not going to say that like, oh yeah, 60% chance that this is diabetes type 2, or it's not
Makes
going to,
sense.
nothing like that. So what it is basically is it's basically just a digitalized version
Yes,
of everything that a nurse or doctor will ask a child,
makes
right?
sense.
So when you go in there and you go in and you're experiencing some sort of a pain, they'll ask
Yes,
you, where does it hurt, how much does it hurt, what type of pain do you feel, right?
yeah,
And then they'll maybe give you a list like, oh yeah, is it a pounding pain, is it a sticking pain, a needle like pain, prickling pain. um, yeah, so we're just basically digitalizing this entire process. And then also we have been in contact with like the regulatory affairs here in Norway. It's called so
nice.
Nor Trials. They're the ones who
Yes,
run like regulatory clinical trials and stuff. We've
for the whole
spoken to them.
country.
Yeah, or at least in our region. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, and they've said that like it's nothing to worry about at this stage. Where it's no problem, so to say. and uh, and
And
in Norway they have this thing like where you can register and go through a process with like a digital solution, and kind of to determine how trustworthy it is and things like that. And so
nice
we believe that we'll fall into a
category.
category there where we can avoid clinical trials.
Trust makes sense, because
Mm,
then you can sell it not as a you can just sell it as a app, and it's not
hmm
really depending on many people, because what has started happening in the UK right now, or in other parts of the EU, is, with the MDR, which is the medical device regulations, which was introduced I think 2017. They've also started to try to classify um, like software as a medical device, and that
hmm
comes with its own set of rules. Sort of like the risks involved with that. So the way you guys are taking the method you guys are taking is smart, in terms of giving yourself the best time. You know, we're not
mm,
putting extra things there that might push it into a different classification. You're giving yourself the best pathway to market, essentially. So
yeah.
I'm happy to hear that, and it's also even nice and reassuring when you hear this from the guys working in the regs, and they say, "Okay,
hmm
there's nothing to worry about. You guys got the green lights on that, and you're moving forward." So that's good. And
Yeah,
with
or just to clarify, I,
yeah,
th- I think at least they're saying it's nothing to worry about, as in,
yes,
we're still a very early stage, and so like
yes,
right now, our focus shouldn't be on that, right? It should just be on developing our prototype. It
yes,
should be on like sort of getting a pilot project in place and things like that. Yeah,
yeah,
and then at a later stage, we'll reassess those things, right?
sure.
And obviously, like in terms of yeah.
Makes sense, and
Mm,
definitely makes sense, and therefore then it comes back to just basically saying just focus on making your MVP. And I realized I didn't expand that abbreviation, because other people might not know what MVP means. Well,
hmm
in basketball, is most valuable player or something like that.
yeah,
Whereas
yeah,
in
yeah.
this particular sense, in business concept, is market viable product. Correct. So it's like
Mm,
it's a product that you can take to market, essentially, even though you can still work on upgrading it and stuff. Just getting to that point alone is a
hmm
milestone in any sort of like startup venture. So that's good. And then coming back to uh, that in terms of the regs and stuff and what you guys are doing in terms of the design. Um, do you, like when you start doing the trials on this to experiment with how people find using the interface and etc. The human factor stuff, the other stuff on the side for the user interface or the user experience with your product is if you also then factored sort of like the language that you're going to be using in terms of like simplified words, or are you going to have a version for the parents as well to see how much their kids is reporting in terms of pain? And I think this could also be an indicator not just for the healthcare professionals but for the parents themselves to know when it's time to take their daughter or son or their child essentially to the hospital. So is it are you guys thinking of those two interfaces at the moment, or are you just focusing on one interface which can both be for parents and the child in question?
Yeah, yeah, and also, we definitely we have like a huge map of
Wow.
all of the different sorts of functions that we could imagine and would like to integrate at some point,
Yes.
obviously. But at the same time, like you just mentioned now, so like the parents can look at and then some sort of gauge whether or not they should take their child to the hospital. Like that's obviously something that we don't want to be necessarily responsible for, right?
Makes sense.
Because let's say worst case scenario, a child goes through the app, and then let's say we did do that and our app said no, you don't need to go to the hospital, and then something happens to the child. Obviously we don't want to be responsible for anything like that. So again, like,
Yes.
to begin with, this will just be a tool to kind of assist in human decision making,
Questions.
right?
Makes sense.
Yeah, but but yeah, in terms of the interface, we're definitely looking at, obviously, the child uses the app. She
Yeah.
is the is one of the users. Plays through the app, goes through the app, and then obviously the healthcare professionals will be able to just kind of extract that data in like its simplest binary form, so to say. Just look at the specific numbers and things. And then we've also looked at having like a third interface, so like for parents,
Nice.
because we've through some of our market research, we found that parents would also like to be able to go in there and like write down notes, things that they observe their child doing, or things that they observe
Nice.
their child feeling,
And it
maybe that
becomes
the
sort of
child
like a diary essentially.
yeah, yeah, exactly,
Nice.
yeah. So like a sort of, so that the parents can also note down things that maybe they will have forgotten 2 weeks later when they go to the hospital, and then they can look back and be reminded. Yeah.
And what would be interesting as well would be to also add I don't know if you guys already have this function there, but uh, the medication the parents have given the child in terms of like the quantity, because as an adult they can they'll be literate enough to say, okay, we'll give him 2 pills of this and how much maybe the pills weighed and stuff, as a way for the doctor to also see what tolerance the kid has sort of built to that point in terms of helping the pain, especially if it's for the chronic pain that children will be suffering. So that's quite interesting that you say that, and yeah, it's just another function that I thought of right now, that a little place in that space for parents for them to become like sort of like a medical journal where they just
Mm.
write the dosage and the medications they've given the child leading up to the time they go
Yeah,
to the
yeah, no,
hospital.
yeah.
So
Yeah, that would definitely be interesting. That's definitely interesting. Like,
true.
you could use it as like a reminder, like,
Of
you're
course.
supposed to take your medicine now. But
Yeah,
that's not anything that we've
we've
integrated yet, or
yeah,
that we've looked at.
makes sense. And
Mm,
then I was looking at your strategy. It was, I know there's like 6 points you mentioned in your strategy. One of the things you already mentioned, and which was focusing on the specific patient group, and then the second one is like developing the prototype. Obviously to get it to sort of like a MVP by sort of like September. Well, it's not really MVP by September, but we know that it's the prototype which you'll be taking to the to whatever group study you're going to be
mhm,
doing with. And then the third strategy for you guys was building a product using low code, um,
mhm,
and like an easy infrastructure. Do you want to touch a little bit on that? Because I don't think you had the chance to talk about the infrastructure you guys have had to invest in to get this, prototype to get it going. Essentially, the servers, is it going to be backed, or is it going to be, or is the data going to be backed locally to phones? How are you guys going around this challenge?
Hmm. Uh, yeah. So I mean, I can begin with so what the two nurses did,
Yeah,
Maya and Elsa, when they first kind of uh, were working with this idea, is they they went to the hospital with pens and paper and asked the children to
nice.
draw down what their pain looks like and feels
Well,
like, you know what I mean? And so that's in a sense that's like a prototype in its
s-
simplest form, right?
yeah, without
And
technology.
exactly, yeah. And so what we're working on now is a digital prototype using like using these platforms kind of where you can just create like step-based interactive prototypes, so like touch prototypes,
Yeah,
but without really having too much system infrastructure in place. You know what I mean? So
nice.
we're not going to be we're not going to be like storing any of this data.
Yes.
It'll just be for the children to play through it, and we're going
Yeah,
to essentially observe them, and take notes, and then have like feedback sessions where we just speak to them
makes
and
sense.
just kind of understand their view of things, understand the parents' view of things, and
Yeah.
understand the healthcare personnel's view of things, right?
Yes.
Um, and then based on all this feedback, we come back with iterations, and hopefully this is a continuous process, and then we aim to develop a more sophisticated, again, I suppose it's a prototype, right, or an
True.
MVP kind of. And
Yeah.
what we're going to do here is use like a no code low code system, so
Nice.
that we can get so that we can get more security in there, so that we can store some of the data,
Yeah.
so that yeah. And then basically what a no code low code system is I mean it's essentially just programming in the form of like blocks kind of. So
Yeah.
it's like drag and drop, or like, I guess, no, like, if you're familiar with Wix
Yes. It's like,
or
isn't it Wix is the website
yeah,
platform where people design
yeah,
websites. Just
exactly, yeah.
anyone can almost design a website. And
Yeah,
I actually
exactly,
still have
yeah.
to create one for this podcast. So far, I've just
Yeah,
been
yeah,
running
yeah.
off what the my podcast host gave me,
Mm,
but eventually I'll have to create my own website. And it's one of those things I've thought of because it's a simplistic approach to designing this essentially. So it makes
yeah.
life a lot easier. But yeah, that's interesting. That's interesting that you say that.
Hmm.
And then obviously then this touches on the fourth point of your guys' strategy, like continuous product development, and which also is linked to the fifth one. But then coming to the sixth point was the trials you guys are planning to run in Sweden and Denmark, the RCA trials. I don't know. Do you want to just for the audience to explain what RCA stands for?
Uh, yeah. So I mean, or well, like when we talk about like Sweden and Denmark, I think
Yeah.
our plan is like to, it's and this is obviously way in the future. You know what I mean?
Yes.
But it's obviously something that you hope. I mean, you always have to think about, right? Is like the
Yes.
sort of the commercial sustainability or the financial sustainability
Yeah.
of your product. But so yeah, when we talk about Denmark and Sweden, we talk about like expansion possibilities, right? Just because we think that the healthcare systems in Sweden and Denmark, and the languages and the cultural barriers are so similar to Norway, that it's just like a very natural progressive stepping stone in terms of expansion. So getting into those markets kind
Nice.
of when we get to that stage
Stage. And
for expansion. Yeah.
yeah, and just a quick question, which I probably should have asked earlier, but when are you guys expecting to get to market? For people listening right now, when can they expect to have, a VennDi app or on the App Store? Roughly what's the time span you've given yourself? Because I know for medtech it can take quite a very long time, but I just want to know what your guys timelines are. And obviously this is not something you have to set in stone that, like, okay, on
Hmm.
this day, on the 1st of January 2026, we're going to be launching this. But I'm just kind of curious in terms of what date you have in mind. I understand these things can be dynamic, especially in our industry. So yeah, when can we expect this?
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, like you're saying, that's a difficult question to answer, but So our current plan is to have this pilot project, and then hopefully, depending on how that goes, some iterations, and we create a finalized product, which will obviously take a while, and at that point we'll need to expand. Our we'll need to expand our startup, bring in some developers, and front end, back it, like all of that kind of stuff to help us create the product itself. Um, and then also what we want to do is, we don't want to post our solution publicly, in terms of like on an app store to
Makes-
begin with, because what we want to do is validate our product, uh, at hospitals
Well, so
to
you now
to
manage the scale is like you know manage how fast it grows, basically.
yeah, yeah. Or well, the reason we want to focus on hospitals to begin with
Hmm.
is to get some validation that our product actually makes a difference, right?
Makes sense.
We don't want to put it out there and give parents some sort of false hope that this will super accurately track their pain without us being able to back that up
True.
with data and with science. And
Yes.
so what we also want to do is we want to engage research or master's students, for example,
Cool. Yeah.
to write their master's thesis within these topics and use
Well,
our solution and work with children, right? So that we can get
more
articles, or so that we can get scientific, like so that we can get, you know
published papers, sort
data.
of like
Yeah.
research paper, like clinical
Hmm.
evidence, basically. What you're
Yeah.
looking for is that
Yeah.
clinical evidence. So to you would have your own verifying knowledge from what you do when you
Hmm.
develop it, and then you'll be basically waiting for the validation, which will come from how it actually performs on the market. So, but I think it's quite
Exactly.
smart that you guys are doing that. We're doing it that way, because essentially what you guys are doing is delayed gratification. If you think about it,
Hmm.
in the sense that you, instead of saying okay we want to go big quickly, you're saying okay you want to control the growth rate of this
Hmm.
app. So by releasing it to a smaller pool first allows you to give you that control where you actually then get to see what things you have to quickly fix and stuff like that before you expand. And I think according to that your plan then was to do Norway first and then maybe start looking at the countries and eventually grow globally. So it's smart. It's a smart approach, and I think it's something that's quite valuable. But looking at it right now, Troz, because for me personally, when I started this podcast, in my head, I had a certain amount of like money it'll cost me, amount
Hmm.
of time I'll need to do, and everything. But after I started, I realized that there was more things that I had to learn and more things I had to do. It, are you guys experiencing any of that? Would you say that if you had known some of the things you know now, you'd have never started, or as advice to people thinking of doing a startup in medtech, because it's quite
Hmm.
a scary thing to do.
Yeah, yeah, no, so absolutely. I mean, and this was a topic, throughout this year as well. People are, medtech is such a difficult space to enter, and the it's so slow, and the innovation takes so long, and I mean, yeah, to a certain degree, I agree, but at the same time, if everybody has that sort of an attitude, nothing's ever going to get done. You know what I mean? So I firmly believe that if you have a good idea that you think can make a difference within the space, then you should go for it, or
Yes.
you should try, or you should talk to somebody about it, or
Yeah.
get it out there.
Yeah.
Because I think otherwise nothing's going to happen. But yeah, no, there are definitely difficulties, and like you said, in terms of costs and things like that, um, we're in a very fortunate position now, and we do it very deliberately. Like, technically, we are not a registered company yet,
Yes.
because what we can do is we can apply for quite a bit of funding through the university. And
Nice.
so, we're doing it very stepwise, right? So we apply for funding there. We're going to apply for more funding in September. And then once that's done, then we're going to register ourselves as a company, and then we can go on to like sort of the next round of public funding from like the Norwegian government. And that's another thing. Like, yeah, here in Norway, we have quite a few different possibilities for grants, not only through the university but also through like publicly funded grants from the government. And so, we go through all these different steps here to raise money, and to get to a position where we will have an MVP, or a minimum viable product,
Nice.
have sort of you know money, hopefully a little bit to so that when we graduate we can pay ourselves a little bit of a I'm not
A
saying it'll be
salary.
much salary, but a little bit of a salary, yeah, just so
Yes.
that we can continue working on this full time.
Nice. And
Mm.
just a quick question then, in terms of you guys have been going around looking for funding correctly, or if you do any sort of like rounds trying to get some funding at the minute, or so far you started with the pot that the university gave you, or have you had to put in your own personal savings into this? How have you guys started?
Yeah, so we haven't put in any of our personal savings. We're all students, and so our funds are pretty limited in that sense.
Yes.
But so through the university, we've managed to bring in around 100,000 kroners, so like
Well,
around $10,000, something like that.
yeah.
And then through different competitions, so like we have, there's like all sorts of different pitching competitions, and
Well,
we've been a part of this fantastic boot camp from Elite,
nice.
like this health tech incubator,
So it's
where
like
we
a
were
Dragon's
also,
Den, would you say? Like it's like a Dragon's
yeah,
Den
yeah,
kind of
yeah,
vibe.
yeah, a
Yeah.
little bit. I mean, you could
Nice.
think of it like that, yeah, I suppose. And so then through these, we've raised another, I want to get this right now, another 55,000 kroners.
Which is about
So
5,000.
around $5,000. So
Nice.
we've raised around $15,000, which to all to very big companies and stuff
Of course.
obviously isn't that much, but like to us,
It's
a team of
it's
4 students
it's massive.
who are just yeah, exactly, who are currently just kind of developing a prototype.
Yeah.
Obviously we don't take any salary, we don't take any money out of the company. Everything that we
Nice.
get, it gets put towards the company and resources that we need there.
True.
Yeah, so in that sense, that's quite a bit of money for us, and more than enough
To get off the
to
ground,
continue,
anyways.
yeah, and to get off the ground. Yeah.
Nice. And no,
Mm.
that's really good you say that. And there's also one thing which I also want to touch, on is the what the government has done there. I remember you also mentioned in some of the stuff you guys sent over, which I was reading about your company, that also the timing is quite correct, because you're getting
Mm.
into in this sort of like era in, or you guys in this era in Norway where the government wants to push technology. I think they've seen maybe some benefits that technology offers to the healthcare sector there. So, do you want to talk a little bit about that? For people who don't know what the government is doing in Norway to help startups, particularly in health tech startups.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, one of the things in Norway is, they came out with this very extensive report a few months ago, uh, that was basically focusing on, the amount of healthcare personnel that we need in the future and kind of the trends in the market. Uh, and there, that it's very clear that, we need more healthcare personnel. We won't have enough nurses to fill all of the positions in 5, 10, 15 years, right? Um, and there you obviously have two opinions, I suppose. One is to educate more nurses, uh, and the other, which I and my team believe in, is to create smarter solutions that require fewer nurses or fewer healthcare personnel to operate, right?
Makes sense.
So by creating solutions such as ours, you won't need as many nurses to physically map pain, right? And then they can go do other tasks. And obviously, if you implement uh, you know, a whole sea of solutions, then
Yeah.
nurses can focus on other tasks. And
Nice.
then the second thing is Norway now has chosen to focus on the health sector as one of their sort of national export export focuses, right?
Makes
And
sense.
so they want to put more essentially money or more resources into the health tech sector, because they obviously believe that the Norwegian medtech sector or health tech sector is growing
Yes.
and can see the potential in exporting what we are developing here in Norway,
Makes
or
sense.
can see yeah. So like obviously previously Norway, their biggest exports have been oil, energy, and
Yes.
fish, and now one of the other focuses that they want to have is on health tech,
Makes sense. And
which is obviously very promising for
of
us.
course, because I said,
Mm,
as I said at the beginning of this episode, or this discussion we're having, is that medtech by itself is actually a new sort of branch of engineering, because before that it was a blend of electrical engineering and other stuff. But it's, as the world has been going, we have become sort of like our own entity, and I guess it's good that the government is trying to jump on this early, because most of the companies in medtech, besides the big pharmaceutical companies, most of the market is fueled by small to medium sized enterprises, and there's a sort of like small medium companies that make up most of the market. So it's really interesting and encouraging to hear that the government is also putting in place things that make it favorable for you guys to stay there, because in
mhm.
other cases, people, when they start a company, sometimes they have to relocate, they have to move to another country with more favorable conditions for their company. And it's good to hear that. And yeah, I don't know, Charles, but that's basically everything that I had for now. But I'm definitely thinking I'm gonna come back to you guys when you launch the product in well, we can't really put a date on it. It's medtech, as we discussed.
Mhm.
It might happen in 2 years. It might happen next year. It might happen whenever you guys are ready. But it'd be nice to see your development. And yeah, I just generally, like hope that you guys succeed, and I'm always happy to help you promote it when you launch it. I'm just happy to share it on my social media, because most of the stuff also spreads through word of mouth. So I really appreciate you coming on the podcast today.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks so much. Yeah, yeah. No,
Thank
it's been a
you.
lot of fun, and
Yeah,
yeah, I look forward to being coming back in the future.
of course. Yeah, I'm sure you
Yeah.
will. So hopefully it'll be soon. So yeah, thank you very much, and yeah, have a good day.